Those of you who have been attending these satsangs will remember that I am looking at a series of questions in the Ramcharitmanas, 7 questions, in particular a discussion between teacher and student. So the last question that we looked at in January, question 4, focused on the definition of the virtuous person, the good person. And the term that is used here in the text for such a person is the Santa. So what are the fourth question was, what are the qualities of the Santa? What are the lakshanas, Santa lakshana, the qualities of the Santa? And the teacher gave a very beautiful and profound description. Para upkara bachana manakaya Santa sahaj swabhav. So a virtuous person, he said, is someone who is committed to the well-being of others, to the care of others, to the flourishing of others in bachana manakaya, in word, in thought, and in action. So one who is committed, but there's this integration of thought, word, and action focused on the well-being of others. But as we saw, the teacher's definition is even more challenging, because he added that such a person, a good person, Santa sahehi dukha parahitalagi. And in dedicating herself or himself to the well-being of the other, the virtuous person, sahehi dukha, is even willing to suffer for the other. If the care of the other requires his or her own suffering, Santa sahehi dukha parahita lagi, willing to endure suffering. And final reminder of last satsang, I think it's important to note also that he mentions that such virtue is not is a non-transactional virtue. In other words, for a virtuous person, caring for others is an end in itself. He or she seeks no reward. So he used the expression, so he says, Sant Paraupkar Vachana Manakaya Sant Sahaj Swabhav. Sant Swahaj Swabhav. It is the intrinsic nature of the good person to engage in such good without looking for any kind of, either tangible or intangible rewards. It's goodness for the sake of being good. So with that short summary of discussion last month, I moved this morning to the question 5. And the student asks the teacher, Parama dharma sruti vidita. Kavana punya sruti vidita vishala. What is the highest virtue that is taught or commended in the Sruti, in the sacred text? Parama kavana punya means, we're speaking of virtue, a virtuous action. What is the highest virtuous action that is commended in all of the Sruti Vishala, in all of the vast range of sacred texts in the Hindu tradition? Is there one virtue that is commended, that stands out among all? And he answers in 5 words, like all of these answers here, very short and direct. And perhaps the answer will not also surprise you. He says, Paramadharma Sruti Vidita Ahimsa. So that the consensus, he says, of all of the sacred texts of this tradition is that the highest virtue, Paramadharma, the highest obligation of human beings, is ahimsa. is non-injury, non-violence. Parama dharma sruti vidita ahimsa. So this is something, you know, mentioned here by the teacher, but I think it's across the spectrum of the Hindu tradition. Mahabharata speaks of ahimsa as the dharma, not only as the highest dharma, but as dharma. Ahimsa is dharma. It says it's the highest purification, it is the highest truth from which all other virtues proceed. And if you practitioners of yoga, you know, in the Patanjali Yoga Shastras, when he begins to enunciate at the very beginning of Yoga Shastras, Yama, Aniyama, he begins with ahimsa. And then ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparigraha. But he gives foremost also to ahimsa in his exploration and discussion of the yoga practice. And generally speaking, you know, in conflicts between different yamas of virtues, ahimsa is regarded as a normative value. There is a very interesting story in Mahabharata about villagers who were pursued by robbers, violent robbers, and they sought shelter in a nearby forest. And in this forest lived a sage, Kaushika, and who had made a vow of satya, that he will never deviate from telling the truth. This was Kaushika's vow. And so then the robbers asked Kaushika, where did the villagers go? If he saw them, and where are they hiding? And so he, in fidelity to his vow, Kaushika told the truth. And the villagers were discovered, they were robbed, and they were killed. And so the Mahabharata asks, was Kaushika right? And in fact, the text says no, he was not right. Because his primary obligation was to protect the life or the lives of these villagers. Ahimsa. Ahimsa comes even higher there than Satya. So the text condemned him for choosing his own personal, because he didn't want to violate his own vow. The well-being of the villagers was not as important to him as fidelity and loyalty to his own vow. Mahabharata says no. Protection of life, the well-being of others is more important. It's an interesting thing in the Hindu tradition, in this order of the virtues. One would think perhaps that Satya would always come first, but this tradition has chosen to do it differently and always put ahimsa before Satya. So if even I told the truth to you, but my intention was to cause you harm or to hurt you in a very callous way, and I could say, I can't defend myself by saying, well, I just told the truth. You have to be concerned about the intent and the consequence of truth-telling. So truth-telling is much more complex than simply accuracy, factual accuracy. See, there's a lot, even in Bhagavad Gita, there's a lot of discussion about correct speech. Anudvega karam vakyam. That word that does not harm, satyam, which is truthful. Anudvega karam vakyam, satyam, priyam, told with love, hitam, and that is beneficial. So truth has to be, it has to be expressed in the context of these other values. It doesn't stand by itself as an unquestionable. So in the discussion this morning, I just want to say that, one can talk about ahimsa from many perspectives, but in my comments this morning, I am going to focus on ahimsa as a personal virtue. We can discuss ahimsa, in relation to policies of states and its significance for international relations, and this is appropriate. I'm not dismissing that, but this is not my primary concern here. I'm focusing on ahimsa as an interpersonal virtue. How can we practice this virtue more meaningfully? How can we walk out of this temple this morning and say, yes, I can do something with this virtue? So the first question is, how can ahimsa be paramadharma? How can it be the highest virtue? The word, after all, ahimsa, in Sanskrit is negative. Himsa is to injure, and then when we put the negative, we get non-injury. We may say, after all, it's a negative statement. It's non-injury. How can it be held up as the highest virtue if there's no positive content to this virtue? So someone will say, look, I don't hurt anyone. I just live by myself. I don't really, reach out to do anything in the community in which I live. But I'm practicing ahimsa, so I don't cause any harm to anyone. So maybe there is some legitimacy to that argument, but ahimsa is not meant to condone self-centeredness. It is not meant to give an approval to a selfish life. So, while literally the meaning of the word is abstention from ahimsa, abstention from injury, it requires something more to get to all of its possibilities. And we see that in those who have written about ahimsa, and especially those who have made it and incorporated it as a central way of being. And I turn to Gandhi. And he always distinguished between two senses of this word, two meanings of ahimsa. He also conceded that in its literal, narrow, literal, negative or passive sense, he said, it means refraining from causing harm to others. And I'm not minimizing that. That's a good thing. If I didn't do anything in my life but didn't cause harm to others, it's quite something to be commended. But he said, this is not all. There is a broad, there's a positive, there's an active sense in which we must understand the meaning of ahimsa. And the active sense is promoting the well-being of others. Not simply not causing harm, but actively promoting the flourishing of others. So which coincides and connects very nicely with the first question, is parahita. In other words, ahimsa is also parahita. Concern for the promotion or fostering the well-being of others. And so he says, ahimsa is grounded in love. It is grounded in unity. In one sense, love is expressed negatively, in the other it's expressed positively. And for him, ahimsa was active love. Active love, which is based on identity with others. Identifying oneself with others, with unity with others. Because this is one of the things about us as human beings. Sometimes one doesn't have much hope for our species. We're certainly the most destructive species on this planet. We've certainly created the most havoc. So much that today we threaten the very sustainability of the planet on which we live by our choices, and our treatment of other species. But I think that ancient teachers understood very well that the more we identify with another being, even a being who is not a member of our species, the more we feel a sense of unity with another, the less capable are we of hurting that one. You know, when you look at history, you take any example, that as a precondition for harming another, the earliest step is always to say that I have nothing in common with the other. It is always a process of disengaging, especially non-identifying with the other, by various labels. You know, I am Hindu, he's not Hindu. Or I am Muslim, they are not Muslim. So you negativize the other, and in that process of negativizing the other, you're disassociating yourself from the other, you're refusing to see yourself in the other, and that creates a condition to hurt. Because you can't look in the eyes of someone in whom you see yourself and hurt. You have to disassociate. There's a process of disassociation through labeling, a process of disassociation through labeling. History bears this argument out. And that's why words are so important. That's why words are not at all to be dismissed lightly. How we speak of the other is going to tell how we will eventually treat that other. So, you know, so this non-injury, the practice of it is grounded, as Gandhi said, in love for the other, and a love that is grounded in learning to identify with the other, to include the other in one's circle of identity. So, the issue of practicing ahimsa in interpersonal relations, as I'm emphasizing this morning, understandably doesn't arise in relation to other human beings with whom we have cordial and good relationships. But it arises in relation to those who, for whatever reason, hurt us by their words or by their actions. So then we have to, if we're asking ourselves, you know, what does ahimsa mean for us? Then the question is, how do we respond without hurting and without hate? How do we respond with what Gandhi called active love to those who hurt us by their words and their actions? And that's why I'm focusing on interpersonal. I'm not asking about the state that is aggressive. I'm asking about the person who is aggressive. I can only tell you what I have found useful in answering this question. And my own teacher in India, Swami Dayananda Saraswati, spoke often of the importance of learning to respond to the person and not the action or the word that hurts. He said, you know, learn to respond to the person and not to the action or the word. And what did he mean by that? Let us take, for example, a person, and perhaps we have all had some experience of this. A person who intentionally tells false or negative stories about you or about me. Now, in responding to that fact, there's no question, the person is saying something that is false and hurtful about you. That's a fact. You could become very angry, right? And the emotion invoke emotions of resentment and hate within you. But he says, you know, focus on the person, not the action, not the word. And such a person perhaps may be doing so out of his or her own insecurity, out of his or her own envy for your success and achievement. Obviously, maybe a person who is seeking success, right, is for some reason frustrated about his or her inability to achieve success and now seeks to undermine the success or minimize the success of others as a response to his or her own failure to achieve certain goals in life. He may or she may have invested his or her own self-worth in becoming wealthy, in business, achieving power, achieving fame, but has not attained those goals. So this frustration expresses itself in a desire to undermine your success with these kinds of stories. So now you're focusing on the person, on the person's. So understanding the cause of his or her behavior in an inability to achieve success enables you to be in control of your own reaction. You're not looking at the reaction, you look what's behind it. What is behind the person's behavior. Focusing on the person, not on the action or the word. You see, he said that that person's behavior is a product of his or her own predicament, his or her own history, and not something for which you are responsible. You see it as a consequence, as in this case, of his or her own life disappointments. I think this is also what Gandhi, in a very different way, if you're familiar with his writing, you know he often said, that the human being and his action are two distinct things. Whether we should approve a good action, but we should be compassionate when people don't do the right thing. Or in other words, you quote often the text, hate the sin and not the sinner. It's the same idea here. It's not very easy to practice. If the person's reactions is based on some misunderstanding, of my words or actions, I can try by honest dialogue to remedy it by explaining myself and to dispel the misunderstanding. But the fact is, given the numbers of people we engage and the different contexts in which we engage them, we never fully understand the history of every human being. We will never fully grasp why someone is who he or she is. What are the socialization processes that such a person has gone through from childhood? What kind of father and mother he or she had? How did they discipline him or her? What went in the formation of his or her own? The kind of being he or she is. There is the influences that have shaped the person to be the human being that he is. It's too complex. There are too many unknowns. And we are not responsible for these unknowns. I think understanding this helps us to cultivate this response of ahimsa. That we don't respond to hateful words with hateful words, or respond with hurtful actions with hurtful actions. We focus on the person. And perhaps when we don't understand, we say, there is some predicament there. If I can help, I will. But I also have to admit, my own humble limits. I can't resolve the personal issues of every human being but I can certainly control my reaction. But I think whoever we are, our human tendency, and we have to understand, this is always to react to the word, to the action, and not to the person. This is a general idea. And this, in other words, it's the impulsive reaction takes over. The mechanical responsive action takes over. And no one is completely free from this. Bhagavad Gita says, very interesting verse in second chapter, Yatato api kaunteya purushasya vipaschita indriyani pramathini haranti prasabam mana. Purushasya vipaschita. Even the best among us, Krishna says, in a moment can be taken over by these impulses. Like a wind, like a gust. Even those who exercise vigilance, will react in situations impulsively. Haranti prasabam mana. Even though we know much better, yet these impulsive reaction can be so strong. The wise can become victims. So we have to be, I think we have to be humble about, but how do we break? Simply we can't be hopeless. Otherwise my talk this morning will not be much. How do we break the habit of of responding impulsively? And I think the answer is in one word, tapas. Tapas. And by tapas here, I don't mean, fasting, abstaining from food, the kinds of things that we normally associate with ascetic and asceticism. By tapas I mean the practice of working to cultivate mindfulness. Mindfulness of thoughts, mindfulness of words, mindfulness of actions. Becoming a santa, which I spoke about, becoming a santa is a process of becoming a mindful human being. To be a good human being is to be a mindful human being. One who is, strives to be awareful of thoughts, of words, and action. This is what I mean by tapas. Because as long as I'm controlled by these impulses, I'm not free. I'm not reacting from a place of freedom. I'm reacting from a place of condition, a conditioned response. But tapas, through tapas, I can become free to choose my responses. And I will remind you also of something that I discussed with you last month, which I find to be very useful. And you may recall that I had shared with you the verse from Samveda, which is the Setu Tirtva, the bridge, how to cross the bridge. Danena, adanena, danena, adanam, tara, akrodhena, krodham tara. So here the teacher was saying that the interesting point that I made is that sometimes, we may not feel in our minds, we may not immediately, if someone says something harsh to you, you may get quite worked up in your mind about it. And that's just, the Gita says, even the wisest among us. One time when my teacher was speaking about this, he gave an example. It was very interesting. I always remembered it. He says, one day I went to the zoo. He said, I went to the zoo, and of course he was wearing his, I think he was here in the United States when he went to the zoo. And soon after walking into the zoo, I overheard someone saying to another person, look, do you see the new one that they brought in this morning? Because he was wearing his saffron robes, he had his beard, she was making a derogatory remark, saying, this is a new animal. Did you see the new animal they brought into the zoo this morning? So he says, then he was challenged, how should I react? What should I do? Yeah, I felt it. He didn't deny it, he felt it. It was hurtful. It was a hurtful remark for anyone to hear, and for Swami to hear also. But in this Samaveda text, even when we may not immediately get a hold on the inner response of anger, perhaps we can still control its expression, the outward expression of it. We can control the outward expression. And in some Vedas says, by practicing, controlling the outward expression gradually leads to a change of the inner. In other words, the transformation is not always from the inner to the outer, but sometimes controlling the outer can also gradually bring about. Because if I know what is right, I may not always immediately be able to think what is right, but perhaps I can do what is right. And the doing of the action brings about a transformation. So, I may feel angry, but perhaps it's a measure of self-control that I don't give expression to it. Because then when I give expression to it, the consequences are very hard to remedy, as you know. It takes a long time to mend the bridges, to heal the wounds of a careless word. So, danena adanam tara. Cross the bridge of lack of generosity by practicing generosity. Cross the bridge of anger by practicing akrodha, freedom from. It does not mean that I am not aware that what the person is saying is harmful or meant to harm. It just means that I am free to respond. I am not responding impulsively. I'm not responding mechanically. Without that kind of tapas, it's impossible to practice ahimsa. Ahimsa is impossible without that tapas of mindfulness. I think, ancient teachers, again, this is all interpersonal, found they returned again and again, to this very powerful example. It's told in the Ramayana, but it's also in other texts. It's a beautiful example that we can keep with us, the example of the sandal tree. Where, in the text it says, that sandal tree perfumes the very axe that hurts it. Kate parasu malay sunubhai, nijaguna dehi sugandha basai. That even the axe that chops the sandalwood, it will return from the sandalwood with its fragrance. I'm not saying that, we should intentionally allow ourselves to be hurt. But in these kinds of interactions, where others hurt us, perhaps, our responses that are not responses of hate can convey something of the perfume of ahimsa that has the possibility of transforming the other. It's a good example to contemplate. I found that ahimsa is often paired in the sacred text with Kshama. Ahimsa and Kshama seem to always go together. In Bhagavad Gita, the word Kshama is used 3 times as a virtue of the godly person. And Shama, of course, as you know, means forgiveness. Ahimsa and Shama are very closely related. I think the practice of ahimsa is also a continuous practice of inward forgiveness of the other. Because when you react to the person and not to the action or the word, and you understand that there is some deep cause there that has led to a disintegration that expresses itself in hateful words, an insecurity that expresses itself, you find a greater space in the heart to practice Shama, to forgive, to feel compassion for that person. Shama does not mean that we are blind to what the person has done or said. You can't. Very often, we're familiar with the phrase, forgive and forget. I think it's not realistic. When someone says something hurtful or does something that hurts me, it's not easy to simply just, the mind is not like a chalkboard where you can just simply wipe the memory. It is quite possible that every time I see the person for something, my mind will trigger that memory. Memories are like that. I don't have always conscious control of what I remember in a particular situation. Sometimes the more you try to forget something, the more you're going to remember. If somebody hurts you, when you see the person, you say, I'm not going to remember this. You're surely going to remember it, right? You're surely going to remember the past. So it doesn't require that we forget what has happened, but it requires that we are now going to respond out of a place of freedom. Even when I remember, I can be free. It's not wrong to remember. The problem is responding impulsively. I'm not from a place of love or compassion. Sometimes not remembering can be dangerous. It can be a dangerous thing. Let us suppose, we're talking about situations of abusive relationships and abusive behavior. If you forget, you might put yourself in very dangerous situations. So forgetting has its own kinds of consequences, and I'm not trying to minimize. It does not require that we subject ourselves to continuous mistreatment or abuse. In fact, I would say, on the contrary, my thought is that the practice of ahimsa and shama, I would say, requires remembering rather than forgetting. I know it sounds in a sense, how can I forgive someone? How can I practice shama towards someone unless I remember what the person has done? Yeah, I have to remember, and if we look at, some examples in our sacred text, when in the Ramayana, when Ram came back from his exile, one of the first persons he went to was his stepmother Kaikeyi, who was part of this orchestration of his exile. And clearly he went and spoke words of forgiveness to her. But he could do that because he remembered what had happened. And also, in that well-known incident when Ravana eventually lost his life, and his brother Vibhishana was, struggling, should I perform his funeral ceremonies? Should I do his last rites? And Ram persuaded him, yes. But when he spoke to him about why he should do his rites, he didn't say that he was not a man who did many wrong things. He said, yes, your brother was an unjust man and performed many cruel acts. So he remembered what the kind of person Ravana was, but he says, but now he's lost the battle. He has died. And he's still your brother. He was not a virtuous man, but he was still your brother. And there was no one else. He deserves the dignity of a last rites. So it was not forgiveness based on forgetting. It was the capacity for forgiveness based on remembrance and compassion. These are the words that I wanted to share with you this morning on ahimsa. I linked ahimsa with shama in these interpersonal relationships. I've spoken about it in ways that are meaningful to me. I'm not a perfect practitioner of these virtues. Tapas is an ongoing process. There's never an end to tapas. Tapas is daily. but I think that I can become a better human being by asking myself every day, how can I be a non-violent human being in relationships with my family, with my students, with my colleagues at the university. How can I bring this virtue of ahimsa alive in all that I do as a part of my own life journey? So perhaps you have some thoughts before we conclude that you would like to share with us, or maybe a question?
Yeah, I have a question.
I may not have an answer, but I hear your question.
The Jain Dharma is based on ahimsa. Gandhiji's mother was coming from a Jain family, and people say that he was influenced by his mother. But Gandhiji always said he's a proud Hindu. So what is the difference? Why didn't he say, I'm a proud Jain?
It's a good question, and I mean, it's one that scholars have wrestled with, because as you know, he was born and he grew up in Gujarat, which is one of the strongholds of the Jain tradition. And in fact, when Gandhi appeared first as a public figure in the Indian context with the centrality of ahimsa, many assume that he was actually Jain. But I do believe, because he also had a Jain teacher. The only one person he acknowledged as a guru was a Jain, Rambachan, I think this was his name, who was a jeweler. And he would often write questions back and forth with him. So he had a lot of exchanges with, not only in the general cultural exposure, but personally, when he was in England, he communicated with this Jain teacher. And so I think there is no doubt that Jainism was deeply influential in his understanding and practice of ahimsa. So for example, his fasting and so on. Why he spoke more, yes, and you're right, when he identified himself. But I think he didn't, those traditions that had their roots in India, Jainism, the Hindu tradition, Sikhism, I think he saw them as deeply interrelated traditions. He was not so much seeing boundaries between them, but as one shared family of traditions. So when he described himself as Hindu, it was not so much to say that he was not Jain, but perhaps to identify the particular family that he was closer to. But for him, these traditions shared so much in common. They were part of one large banyan tree-like family. But he acknowledged his learning from the Jain tradition and from so many other traditions. Today we unfortunately sometimes think of religious traditions as more as fortresses, walls. But for people like Gandhi, there were no walls. One should drink deeply from the streams of all of these traditions. What can be enriching and life giving? And certainly found a lot in the Jain tradition.